It's The Takeaway. I'm Tanzina Vega, and we're back with you broadcasting from WNYC's The Green Space in front of a live studio audience. So excited to be here on my one-year anniversary. Thank you so much. And boy, has it been a year. That's why we thought it was really important to end this special hour talking about one of the most important issues to me as a journalist, the truth gap. Susan Chira is with me on stage. Susan is the editor-in-chief of the Marshall Project, but before that, she spent about 38 years as a reporter and senior executive at the New York Times. And I was your intern once a long time ago. Susan, welcome to The Takeaway.
It's great to be here. And congrats on an amazing year, Tanzina.
Thank you.
Thank you
so
proud.
much. So we talked a lot about President Trump and truth. We can't just begin and end it there. I mean, this is something that was happening before 2016, right?
That's absolutely right. I think that what you identify as the truth gap is a very, very disturbing trend that's started a long time ago but has accentuated. And, you know, the really scary thing as a citizen and as a journalist is how many Americans, both from the left and the right, have trouble distinguishing what we would call facts from opinion, but also interpret facts based on their political perspective. And, you know, as a journalist, you're taught to revere facts. And what is really concerning is that this respect for facts, I mean, truth is even a larger question, but we'll stick with facts, is foundational for democracy and for understanding and sifting through deliberate misinformation and propaganda.
Last year, Pew actually looked at the issue of whether or not Americans can discern fact from fiction. And this is concerning because the results were not good. They did a survey of 5,000 U.S. adults and asked people to distinguish between 5 factual statements and 5 opinion statements. 36% of the people who were surveyed, who said that they had a high level of political awareness, were able to correctly identify all factual statements. 36%. Not a good sign. What does that tell? Is this our fault? What is this, the education? What's going on here, Susan?
Yeah, this is a really disturbing fact and unsurprising, sadly, to those of us in journalism. And that's because of many, many things, right? I think that there's a distrust in the news media, which sadly the news media needs to own too. There's been a sense, you know, when you talk about the empathy gap and you talk about the wealth gap, those things, you know, contribute to the fact that different groups of people have felt unrepresented, unheard, and unportrayed on the right and the left, right? Or, you know, from different constituencies, if you will. And so, one, there's this increasing distrust that somehow the reality people live, they don't see reflected at them back. There's the deliberate stoking of misinformation, which, of course, did not start with the Trump administration, but they're a kind of fine, dark acts practitioner of it. I mean, when you have Sarah Sanders, you know, admitting with no shame that she just made things up, you know, and you have the president tweeting continuously things that are factually demonstrably wrong, but you have to look at an ecosystem that produced it. And part of that is the rise of ideologically polarizing news outlets. You know, you have Fox News, but you also have, you know, outlets on the left that will spread what you might call myths that aren't necessarily factually demonstrable. So you have an ecosystem that kind of presented truth as people would like to see it to those who wanted to believe it. And then, Tanzina,
no, that's okay.
But I think the third thing, which of course we saw come out in the 2016 election, is the deliberate misrepresentation by, say, the Russians and other actors who were trying to stoke political division, racial division, ethnic division by masquerading as news. And the deliberate planting of misinformation through kind of cyber attacks and others is another factor that keeps us misinformed and at each other's throats.
And it's infuriating, I think, to think about how, like, why couldn't we, the media, or we, the American public, see that more clearly? What happened that we just decided that we were going to go along with that it worked? Was it the political moment that just helped?
I think there are many things. Obviously, political polarization has deepened. Each side thinks the other is not just wrong, but often evil. And so when you have that degree of emotion, it also becomes like important for people to believe certain things, important to their sense of justice and fairness and representation, as we discussed. So I think you have political passions at a boiling point. But you also have sort of the campaigns of various organizations to try to, the birther question with President Obama, just the repeating, relentless repetition of lies that then get sold as truth.
Do we, because I think we as the media also need to take responsibility here, do we need to do a better job at labeling the way we label things? And you and I both know from the New York Times there was a meticulous process of where things went, what the headlines said, what they didn't say. Are we not doing as good of a job at that anymore?
It's interesting. When I was at the New York Times, one of the things that I did with my colleagues is we spent nearly a year looking at our audience and who reads us and what they think and who they are. And one of the things we found that was discouraging is that even many of our readers didn't take the labels in that separated news and opinion. They didn't see the distinction. That, of course, is partly because the news media has changed. What used to be a way of writing news stories that was very on the one hand, on the other hand, and kind of straightforward, that became insufficient in a world. For example, if you look at climate change, it's not sufficient to say one side believes this and one side believes that, because the facts point otherwise. So things got more interpretive. And as they got more interpretive, the line between news and opinion, I think, in the public eye got blurred.
Susan, we have to take a quick break, but stick around. More on my conversation about the truth gap in this country in just a minute. It's the Takeaway Live from WNYC's The Green Space. I'm Tanzina Vega, and we're back with Susan Chira, the editor-in-chief of the Marshall Project. And before joining the Marshall Project, Susan spent 38 years as a reporter and senior executive of the New York Times. Susan, we've been talking about the truth gap. And I want to bring up this idea that Christiane Amanpour talks about a lot. And she says we journalists should be truthful and not neutral. Is that what you're describing when you say our journalism has shifted from this on the one hand model?
I think I understand exactly what Christiane is saying. I still believe in the value of not taking a political opinion and really examining your own assumptions to make sure that your own idea of what the truth is carefully fact-checked. But I think that what I was trying to explain is I think that people have become, the line that used to be much clearer between news and opinion has become blurred in readers' minds. And I also think what I was trying to say with, say, climate change or with the Trump presidency, the difficulty is when the president of the United States says something that is demonstrably factually untrue, the news media must, in my opinion, call him on it just as you would any public figure. And yet you don't want to be, at least at the New York Times and other mainstream news organizations, you don't want to be seen as the opposition to the president. You don't want that calling someone on factual misstatements to be seen as a kind of political statement. And so it's a difficult dilemma.
And oftentimes that comes up in the language itself. I mean, the president has called the media, the enemy of the people. We talked about language in our previous segment. In terms of language here, phrases like truth decay, alternative facts, fake news. This language, I think, hurts us, seriously hurts us.
I think it's a terrible crisis because, as the publisher of the New York Times, A.G. Sulzberger, told President Trump directly, when he calls the news media the enemy of people or lying, news outlet A, B, or C, he's actually labeling them as un-American and encouraging attacks against them. Journalists are facing dangers they have not faced before. You look at the appalling shooting in Baltimore. Annapolis, pardon me. You look at the idea that he's also enabled autocrats around the world to use those similar phrases in labeling their own news media as traitors. This is deeply disturbing.
I do want to talk a little bit also about the need for media literacy in the United States, which is something I think is lacking. I'm going to take a little bit of a, maybe somewhat of a defensive stance here as a journalist who traffics in this stuff all day. I think, we hear a lot about I'm wondering how much does the public need to be better educated about what we do versus journalists needing to show what we do more? Because a lot of it is, well, show your work, show your process, be more transparent, answer all the questions on Twitter, And I think that there comes a point at which journalists have to be trusted as professionals who work with a code of ethics and standards, at least in mainstream media, and accountability. I could lose my job if I lie. I could lose my job if I do certain things that are journalistically unethical.
I think it's a combination. I do agree that, news literacy is something that's become more urgent. It should really be taught in every school. It should be part of, elementary school education, because it's objectively harder for citizens to tell the difference now. Let's not forget the deliberate misinformation, the social media becoming a kind of maelstrom of passion and emotion. I mean, I think it's harder than it used to be. Mm-hmm. And we don't have, I'm going to date myself, but when I was a kid, Walter Cronkite was kind of like Uncle Walter. When you saw him on TV, you trusted him. Those figures don't exist anymore because there's a cacophony. I mean, blogging and
tweeting
and all these other forms have kind of blurred these distinctions. So one, I have empathy, if you will, for the consumers of news. But I also think that what also happened is anyone could be a journalist, right? And actually, journalists are trained. They are a profession, and they are taught to observe certain codes. So yes, I hope we can deepen the trust and earn back the trust. And yes, I think people need help distinguishing and assessing what's true and what's not.
How do we as journalists decide, and these are conversations that you've had every day, we have them every day, we'll probably have them today after this show, deciding what we're going to cover tomorrow. Deciding what to cover and what to ignore when everything feels like a constant, nonstop assault of information. How do we decide what to do?
I know. It's a constant dilemma, and you're always, I was in the position of helping to make decisions about what the New York Times covered and didn't cover, and I was always second-guessing myself, as you try to do, to be intellectually honest. I think on the one hand, the fact that we have social media. You look at, say, what's colloquially called Black Twitter, or you look at the advent of the ability on cell phones to capture incidents of racism. So there are things that used to be ignored that are now put out that are important for us as a society to confront. But you also wonder about the deluge, and people get overwhelmed and tuned out. So there isn't a firm rule or an easy way to summarize it. But yes, it's hard to sort through, and we have to make sure that our own assumptions are challenged, as I said before, so we make sure we're covering a wide range of perspectives and events.
We've got about a minute left in this segment. I just want to, you are continuing to do this work. I am continuing to do this work. So many of us are. Can we end on a hopeful note here? Is there? I mean, if there isn't, we can handle that too.
Yes, I absolutely refuse to give up on the idea that we can build trust back in the news media. I believe that one thing that has happened is that the average citizen has, I think, become more aware of the importance of deeply resourced news media to do investigative reporting, to hold the powerful to account, to expose injustice in every way. I believe people understand better than they did a few years ago why a free press is so important.
And we hope that you all appreciate that as well. Susan Chira, thank you so much. Editor-in-Chief of the Marshall Project, 38 years as a reporter, senior executive at the New York Times. Thank you for being with us today.
It's my pleasure.
And that is our live show for today. Thank you to this live audience for joining us in the studio. Thank you to the Green Space for hosting us. And I want to take an opportunity right now to thank my team who do not get heard often and who make this show happen every day. Isabel Angel, Beanish Ahmed, Alex Boti, Jake Howitt, Vince Fairchild, Ellen Frankman, David Gable, Rob Gunther, Amber Hall, Polly Irungu, Lydia Jean Cott, Jose Olivares, and Jason Tereski, and Ellen Frankman. Thank you so much for everything you do. I'm Tanzina Vega. This is The Takeaway, and we'll see you tomorrow.